Hi, and welcome to my studio. I'm Joy Fay, and I work here at the Mijas Art Centre, which is in a beautiful little village in southern Spain, Mijas Pueblo, where I have my studio and I run classes and courses and workshops. So today I'm going to give you a little demonstration inspired by Monet, well, who isn't, on his lily pond. And it's really designed for beginners to really show you how you can very easily and simply put together a lovely painting that you can feel really proud to put on your wall. So without further ado, let's get started. Well, it's really important to get organised. I've got here all my paints set out, ready to go. I've got my palette there, and then my mixing palette, my brushes, and my great new canvas, which I've made myself, which I'm very pleased about. So get organised before you start. It's really important. And now here I've actually I started filming and realised that the camera wasn't on, so I put a gesso coat over the first layer that I did. So I'm basically just starting again, and slowly but surely I'm going to build up the layers. I'm using different blues here. Basically I'm using ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, and quite a lot of white, and I'm blending it in. I'm using a gesso brush, which I find really useful because it's got some, lots of things that you can do with it. You can just brush it in smoothly, or you can rub it in. They're really hardy little brushes, and they're very inexpensive. So it's great just to have that little brush to do your foundation and your layers. So I'm just kind of filling in how I'm feeling about, how the water is going to be. And it's kind of interesting because you have to kind of get in a zone, if you like, when you're painting. You get into it, and you do put everything else out of your mind, and you go with the flow. And I'm talking to myself all the time when I'm doing this. What's the water like? Where's the light happening? And the painting is going to be lighter at the back, in the background, and it's going to be darker in the foreground. So as you're building up the layers, have that in mind. And you can keep going over it. The acrylics are so wonderful because you can do so many different things with them, and if you're not happy with it, you can just go over it and blend it back in again. And of course it dries so much quicker than oil. I mean, I love using oils, but I'm not very patient, so I don't like the waiting time for it to dry. So for me, acrylics work really well. And I don't use a lot of water, a little bit, but not too much. And I sometimes use mediums to help the paint last a lot longer, so it don't dry so quickly. But you can see here that I'm just, blending in, putting the colours in, blending them in, going back into it. And it sort of starts to form some nice layers for your water. Think about the water as, it's a heavy mass. It's a body of it's really difficult to explain. But when you're talking to yourself, think about the water. It's never always the same, and it's got all different kind of movements in it and colours underneath, what's going on underneath the water. And, if you just visualize yourself looking at a pond and seeing how it feels to you, that lovely saying of you're painting really not what you see, what you don't see. In other words, it's about painting what you feel about the subject that you're doing. So that's what I mean when I say getting into the zone, is that you get attached and involved in it, and you put everything else out of your mind. There's no distractions there. So you can see this combination of colours of the cerulean blue and the ultramarine blue, and then dipping into white again, and pushing it into the paint. And you also, might use a little bit of yellow, and possibly put a little bit of yellow into the blue, so you got a little green, and then some darker blue. Here I've got a nice darker blue, and blending it in, seeing where it's going. There'll be different shadows and colours on the water from the reflection of the sky. So again, that's something to bear in mind when you're doing this. Think about what kind of day it is. Is it a sunny day? Is it a grey day? And that has a bearing on what your water's going to be. Are the trees around? Are you going to have reflections from the foliage around the pond? So all those things you can sort of be thinking about, of where you're standing and looking at the picture in your mind, what you want around it. I mean, this is my idea, but when you come to do it, when you're doing it, your idea might be, different. You might have a different vision of what your pond looks like. This is mine. You can see that the light's up there in the right hand corner, and I'm going to keep it light at the top, and that gives the painting some depth. So you can see I'm just blending it all in and making it feel as if it's moving in a way with the depth of the water. So it's so interesting when I'm painting. I'm just in another world. And anything else that's going on around me, there's quite a lot of noise when I'm in the studio, because we have, especially if I've got the window open, because there's a terrace, and then that overlooks the plaza of the village, and sometimes there's music playing there and the kids are running around playing, and it can be quite noisy, but I'm just oblivious. I don't hear anything of it because I'm involved with what I'm doing and thinking and feeling about the subject. And you're developing something, you're creating something. It comes from deep inside you, and I love that feeling. So you can see here now I'm making the foreground quite dark, which is important because it then throws your eye into the painting. So you always sort of tend to make the corners a little bit darker with whatever you're doing, just so you can focus. The viewer looking at the painting can go into the painting, rather than go off. If it's all the same, there's no variation, and the viewer can, if you like, just grey over because there's nothing different in it. So it's good to create those differences. And then thinking about the composition. I talk a lot about composition in my workshops, but basically how you think about the composition is dividing the canvas into thirds, both vertically and horizontally, and where those lines cross, you call that your focal point. And a lot of beginners tend to go straight to the center and go from the center out, which the eye hasn't got anywhere else to go other than the center. So when you're looking at composition, think about what you're going to do on those points of reference. So imagine, an imaginary grid, and on those four corners, or those four crosses, sorry, you're going to have something of interest, and you'll see as I develop this painting how that works, where the lilies will go and the flowers will go in those particular areas. So here you see I'm nearly got my first layer on, and it's already starting to get a bit of movement in it. And it's good to get that first blocking in right, so you feel good about it, and then later you can go back into it and correct it if you want to. So I'm putting a little bit more white on here in the corner and blending that in. just to give a feeling of light where the sun is shining from. And later on I'll put a little bit of yellow in there, and you know, it has a glow. Has a glow to it. So there you go. There's the first layer down. So now we're going to start putting the lilies on and placing those in the right place. So you can see I'm starting there at that focal point area, on that on that cross. So that gives me a good starting point. And you know, when we're doing this, you want to think about in terms of odd numbers. Very rarely, when you're placing any kind of object on the canvas, you're not looking at even numbers. Don't ask me why, because I'm not sure. But we go in odd numbers. So you'd have 3, or you'd have 5, or you'd have 7. Not very often you just go like 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not interesting. So you want to make the painting as interesting as possible. So I'm doing the lilies in different colours of green, olive greens and bright greens, and then mixing it with you know, the yellows and the blues together, maybe a little bit of yellow ochre and the blue. So you get a nice feel of colour tones in it. And they're not all the same, because of course they're not. They're all, you know, that you have a base colour, but they've all got different reflections of light on them. So they're all going to be slightly different. So you can see here I'm just building it up slowly, seeing where to place the lilies and the different sizes. Now, you know, the ones in the foreground are going to be bigger than the ones in the background, and they're slightly different shape. You know, when you're doing them in the foreground, you know, they're more like a saucer, and in the background they flatten out a little bit because they're further away. You don't see the whole thing. So that's something to bear in mind when you're putting your lilies in, that they're going to be bigger in the foreground, and then different shape and a little bit smaller in the background. And you know, you're building up the interest. You want people to kind of to go into the painting. It's sort of telling a story, and you know, hoping to take that viewer into a very soothing place of looking at the lilies. And the lilies are so symbolic. You know, they have a huge amount of different symbolism to them. You know, they're quite popular in the Buddhist philosophy, simply because a few different reasons. Firstly, that the lilies tend to open up in the daylight, and then they close up in the night time, and it's kind of has a symbology of enlightenment, because you're opening up to the light, and also the beauty of them when they've actually really grown from mud. And I rather like that idea myself. That, you know, out of all the mud, all this beauty can suddenly arise on the top of a pond. It's just wonderful, really. So I can understand that, and I like that. You know, when I'm thinking about when I'm painting these things, I often go in and have a look what the significance is, and you know what they mean. You know, I've also done that with poppies when I'm painting my poppies, to find out why the poppies are so you know, popular, and what the meanings are of them. So you can see now I'm going up into the painting, and the shapes are smaller. The green goes to more bluish colours. The blue takes us back, and reds bring us forward. So the greens are going to be more blue in tone in the background, and more red tones in the foreground. It really makes us think, you know, painting. it puts life in a whole new perspective, really. And I just love it because you start seeing things very differently. You start looking at things very differently. And I know when I do a lot of workshops, it's wonderful to see people kind of realize that when they start looking at nature, how much more beautiful it is because they're looking at it with fresh eyes and seeing shadows, seeing shapes, seeing where the light's coming from, seeing the difference in greens, for example. There's so many different color greens, and how the light hits the top of the trees or the grass or the buildings, and the reflected color. It's so wonderful because you get a whole new perspective of life. Because you're looking differently, you observe so much more, and it's wonderful. And people come back and say, I never realized that. Even just maybe looking at the mountains or looking at in their garden or when they're in the car, just seeing things differently. It's so wonderful. So anyway, here we are. We're filling in more of the lilies. Looking at the composition, you can see I've got quite a lot of lilies on that first third of the painting, and then filling in between. So the lilies from the bottom will kind of take you up to the lilies on the top. It's beginning to get you can start to get a feel of the composition of it going into the painting, and you notice that I haven't put anything in the middle, which makes all the difference in the world. So I'm just kind of sharpening up the shapes now, and seeing how where the shadows are underneath, and that will define the shape when you put the shadow underneath. And you'll see as we go, you have to kind of make the lilies look as if they are sitting on the pond, not that they're separate from it. And that's kind of the tricky part. But you do that with the shadows. So as you're adding the shadows in, you'll start to see that there is a relationship between the water and the lilies. So you begin to get a real good feel of it. So I'm just slowly building it up here, and making the shapes more definite. And it's interesting. I kind of move around, seeing which one's calling me to do what. And because you're in the zone, you get a feel, and you're talking to yourself about it. How does this feel? How does that look? Where would the shadow be? How does that sit with? And that's kind of the conversation that's going on in your mind as you're progressing through the painting. It's in that sense, it's not random. You're talking to yourself, and in the feel of the painting, and that's kind of so important. And that's what's so therapeutic about painting, because you forget about everything else, whatever you might be worrying about. If you got the electricity bill this morning, or you got to pay the mortgage or the rent or whatever it is, it all kind of just disappears out of your mind because you're so involved with what you're doing. And then when you've finished and you have to focus back on those problems, you've got a different perspective of them. They might not seem as terrible as they did earlier on because you've thought about things differently. It's really meditatory, and that's really why I love painting so much. It just takes you into a completely different world, and you can leave all your cares and woes behind. So now I'm adding more to the shadows, adding more to the actual water, which you can see. So I'm just going to carry on with this for a little while, adding here and there. It takes time to build it up, and if you're following along doing this, you'll see, you'll know you have to be patient. But if you're involved with it, it doesn't really seem like patience. It's just what you're doing, and how enjoyable it is to to be involved in it. I can completely see why Monet was so obsessed with his lily pond. I can remember myself many years ago. I used to live near a beautiful park in the UK, a place called Tatton Park, and they had the most magnificent garden. And my son was very little, and I used to take him for a walk into the park and into the gardens, and they had the most stunning pond, and it was fabulous with a bridge over it. I mean, not dissimilar really to Monet's pond. And I can remember, sitting there with him as a little boy and watching the ducks on this pond, and it had wonderful lilies and lots of greenery around, and it was so calming. I used to love going there. It was fabulous. And painting and nature are part and parcel, really, and to be able to see it differently because you do paint is very magical, because you have a completely new appreciation of the beauty of it all. It's magnificent. I love that. So fond memories for me of those days. And here I am all these years later painting it, and I'm now going to begin to put some of the actual lilies on the flowers on the lilies. So I'm just starting here. Now again, your lilies in the foreground, the flowers are going to be bigger than they are in the background, and brighter because you see them more clearly. So I'm just building up the shapes. I'm using some white and pink, so I'm mixing the white with the pink. You can use different kinds of pink. I'm using alizarin crimson here, and then mixing it with some white. And then also I'm putting a little just white and a tiny bit of yellow ochre to make it a nice cream colour, and that adds some contrast also. So I'm adding these, and then one has to remember not just to sort of plonk them on the top, but give them something that they're sitting on, because they're sitting on the leaf, on the actual lily leaf itself. So you put a little bit of shadow under the flower, so it makes it look as if it's grounded to something. It's not just kind of floating or on its own on the top. It's come out of, it's actually started from the depths of the water, or like we said before, it started in the mud and it's grown up, and then it's produced these beautiful flowers. So you can see here that the flowers in the foreground are bigger and brighter than they are in the background. So we build that up slowly. Now I'm not putting a flower on every leaf. You don't want to go for overkill. So I'm placing the flowers again strategically from a compositional point of view, so your eye will go round the painting and into the painting, not just zoom in on one flower, but actually you'll go round the painting, so you're looking at the foreground and then going into the background. So it takes your eye round compositionally. So when you're looking at placing those lilies, think about that. Think about how where you're putting them to make it as interesting as possible. So this is this process now, and I'm just doing like little swipes up. So it's not kind of thick and blotchy. It's just with a thin brush. I'm using the edge of a flat brush here just to gently stroke in the petals of the flowers. And if you have a look at lilies, they're such beautiful, the petals are beautiful. So when you're painting them, feel about that beauty, think about how they are growing. I can remember one of my teachers telling me a long time ago, imagine yourself being well, in that case, he was talking about trees. Imagine yourself being the tree and growing. And it was wonderful. So again here, think about being the flower and growing. That's why you can't think about anything else. You haven't got time because you're so involved with what you're doing. And you're part of it. And that's when when you finished it, it's part of you. And then when you come to sell it, hopefully, you're giving away part of your heart and soul. And that's what I love. I love my paintings going to lovely owners who going to sit there and admire it, and it's part of their home. It's a wonderful process, really. I just wish more people would buy paintings. But that's not the point. The point is to enjoy the process and learn as you go. I'm never ever stopping learning. I'm always, wanting to find out more and find out more and study the great painters. My one of my teachers always used to say to me, if you're going to copy anything, copy the greats. Find out how they did it. Look at their process and their composition. So I'm just kind of changing the water here and adding some more feel to the water, so you can keep going back. That's the beautiful thing about it. It's an ongoing process, and if you're not feeling right about it, go in and make it feel right. And that's what I'm doing now. I'm just really kind of looking to see where I can add more light, where I could add more shadow, defining it more, and then it suddenly sort of starts coming together and you get a real nice feel of it. So I hope you're enjoying this, and you will try it at home, because it's such a lovely thing to do, and you can create your own pond. It doesn't have to be these colours. If you're going to have a look at some of Monet's pictures, his all the different ones that he's done, all the different pond pictures, a lot of them are all different colours. Some of them are all different shades of green and yellows, and some of them are very dark, some of them are very bright, some of them are all very olive green, some of them are very colourful. So you can create your own. This is just my interpretation, and when you're doing it yourself, something else will take over from you, and that's the beauty of it, really. And when I do the workshop, I'll show you the different interpretations that the students do in a workshop. They're all very different, and it's marvelous to see, because we're all so unique, and we'll give our own unique interpretation and find our own way with it. So just kind of adding some light here. And I know I'll go in and change it, look at it for a while, and then do a critique on it and see what I feel I'd like to add to it, or what I don't like about it, and if the composition's working for me, if it's sitting well, and you get the feeling of it. That's the great thing. You get there's sort of an intuition that you will have about it that feels right.
Okay, so there we are, finished. And I really hope you enjoyed that. It's just a question of diving in and having a go, and you can see if you make mistakes and you're not happy with something, you can easily change it. So yeah, it's been fun to do, and I hope you have fun doing it yourself at home. Now, if you like this video, please click like and make a comment. That would be lovely. If you've got any questions, just put them in the comment box, and subscribe so you can get more of the same. And I hope you enjoy, and here's till next time. Happy painting. Bye for now.